Hello, my name's Kate and I'm an Independent Fertility Nurse Consultant. I'm going to talk to you about my 4 top tips to boost your fertility when you're trying to conceive naturally. So the first one is get really empowered with your body and your menstrual cycle. Learn as much as you possibly can. And importantly, understand when you're ovulating. Once you know when you're ovulating, then you're doing all you can to maximise each month. So a lot of ladies might choose to use ovulation predictor kits, and whilst they can be useful, they can be quite expensive and it can be quite time consuming, and I do find that they can often be overwhelming. So my preferred method is to observe your natural fertility indicators that are in your body. You might have heard of some of them, but maybe not all. So the first one is your temperature. So your temperature changes throughout your cycle, and it's as a result of progesterone in the body. So by taking your temperature every morning at around about the same time, before you sit up, before you have a cup of tea, before you do anything, then you can chart that on an app. There's lots of apps that you can chart it on now, and that starts to show you what your body is doing. And you'll notice halfway through the month, or just as you ovulate, you'll have a rise in temperature, and that temperature indicates that ovulation has occurred, and that temperature then stays elevated and will stay elevated if you conceive, or will drop down if you don't conceive in that cycle just prior to your period. So that's your first natural indicator. Now, on its own, that's useful, but it's telling you when you've already ovulated. It's not telling you when you're about to ovulate. So if you put that with another fertility indicator, which tells you when you're about to ovulate, then this can give you so much more information. So this indicator is your cervical mucus, and your cervical mucus changes throughout the month, like your temperature does. So at the beginning of the month, when you've got a bleed, you probably don't notice any cervical mucus. But as your estrogen levels start to increase, that it starts to increase your estrogen in the bloodstream, and therefore your cervical mucus starts to build up. And you might notice that initially it's perhaps thick, white, clumpy, and then eventually, as you near to ovulation, it transitions to a silky, smooth, light, clearer, and more profuse secretion. A lot of people term that egg white because it looks a little bit like egg white. So this information is gold dust. This is your body telling you you are either ovulating or about to ovulate. So you look for that, you notice that, you can maximize sex around that time also, and then you can notice when your temperature has risen that then confirms that ovulation has occurred. So that's 2 indicators. The third indicator is slightly more difficult to understand and to get to grips with, and not every woman feels comfortable in doing this one, but this is the position of your cervix. The position of your cervix changes throughout your cycle, just like the other 2 indicators. And what happens is when you're not fertile, so at the beginning of a cycle and after ovulation, when you're no longer fertile, then your cervix is quite low in the vagina, quite easy to feel, and it feels like the end of your nose. As you become more fertile, your cervix moves up in your vagina, so it's more difficult to feel, and it transitions to feel like your earlobes. It goes from that to that. So it's worth getting to know your body, understanding more about your fertility to see whether that information helps you identify ovulation. So I really would recommend giving that a go. My second tip is to have regular sex. Now, I know that might sound really obvious, but so many of my patients come to me and they're just not having enough sex. The recommendations are that you have sex every 2 to 3 days throughout the cycle. So I know we talked about observing your natural fertility indicators and then perhaps maximizing sexual intercourse around that time, which is absolutely you can do. But it's also important to make sure that you're having lots of sex throughout the cycle. And there are a number of different reasons for this. Number 1, if you're having regular sex, then you've got really good, fresh, healthy sperm for the time of ovulation, rather than old sperm that's been sitting around in the testes for a few days or weeks. So that's one thing to remember. The second thing is some research a couple of years ago showed us that actually the uterus is reminded that sperm isn't a foreign body if you're having regular sex, and therefore it's more accepting environment to sperm. So that's just an important thing to remember. The third thing is, when you're trying to conceive, sometimes sex can start to become quite difficult. It can become more of a chore because it's all about making a baby rather than the reason why the 2 of you fell in love with each other in the first place. So it's important for a good relationship to maintain that regularity of sex. So it's not just about trying to conceive, but it's intimacy and because the 2 of you love each other. My third tip is all about nutrition. So we are what we eat, and I think we underestimate the importance of what we put into our body and how that can impact on our fertility. So it's really important to have a good, healthy diet for both of you. So lots of really good fruit and veg. I always talk about eating the rainbow, so all different colours of fruit and veg, not just sticking to the same fruit and veg throughout the cycle. So lots of different fruits and veg. And then you're going to get all the nutrients that you need. Having good protein sources from either meat, chicken or fish, or if you're vegetarian, sourcing or vegan, sourcing good protein sources from elsewhere. Making sure that you keep those refined carbohydrates, the sugars, the biscuits, the cakes, the white pasta, the white rice to a minimum, and perhaps switch to whole grains. Whole grains are super important when it comes to fertility. So whilst you might Google a fertility diet and probably come up with 150 different answers, research shows us there is no one particular fertility diet apart from a Mediterranean style diet. So it has all those healthy things that I've talked about, fruit and veg, good protein sources, keeping the refined carbohydrates low, omega-3s, all of those really, really good things. Think about Greece on a plate, and then you've got your great Mediterranean diet. It seems to be the best one for fertility. My fourth advice, and probably one of the most important things, is to stop smoking. And this is really important for both of you, particularly as well for men, because we do know that sperm can be really destroyed by smoking. The good news is that men can, when they stop smoking, can help improve sperm. So that's important by making those lifestyle changes. For women, we also know that it impacts on ovary health and egg health. So not smoking and stopping smoking, if you can, is going to really help. And the same is for vaping. Although we don't have so much evidence for that yet, we are aware that there's probably an impact on sperm health, particularly due to the toxins that are in the vape. So that would be my top tip, is to stop smoking, and equally don't vape.